Things got ugly in a hurry on Wednesday night for the Phoenix Suns in a big loss, 125-98 to the Boston Celtics. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll talk about why this game shows, more than anything else, why the Suns' margin of error right now is just, frankly, smaller than any other NBA contender. Let's break it down. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen on this Wednesday night. Well, Thursday morning, by the time this actually uploads, I think. Welcome to Locked On Suns. Welcome to Thursday. Hope you are finding the show in okay spirits. It was not a pretty day, but we appreciate the listen and community on these days. Nevertheless, if you're finding us for the first time, we are everywhere: Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Wherever you are, we are there. Hit subscribe or follow to get this show in your feed every Monday through Friday. If you are on YouTube, hit the bell down below as well. Get a notification every time this show goes live, and drop a comment with your thoughts on this 27-point loss. Frankly, 27 feels, when it came out of my mouth, it felt overly kind, if I'm being honest with you. It was ugly. There's no way around that. So we don't have a moment of the game or takeaway of the game, anything like that tonight. I have one major point that I want to make to start things off, and that has to do with the margin of error. Today's show, guys, is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. This game started back and forth a little bit. The Suns made, Mikal Bridges got a dunk early on. First possession of the game, I think. Chris Paul ran a pick and roll with Mikal Bridges. Bridges rolled to the basket, got a dunk. Felt pretty good. That's something the Suns have been trying to integrate back when Chris Paul was healthy. Easy way to get Mikal going. Not a lot of pushback at the basket for Mikal. All right. In business. Game went back and forth, mostly because nobody could make a shot from that point on. Mikal and Book started, I believe, 2 of 9 from the field. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum started 2 of 12 from the field, I believe, combined. And at that point is when things went off the rails, similar to the Dallas game. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in today's show for sure. And then I think tomorrow, especially, I want to dig into the bigger picture ramifications of this game. But even in that moment, I think it was evident. The margin of error is not as big for the Phoenix Suns right now as it is for other contenders. Because you look at what Boston is dealing with. They already don't have Robert Williams. Now, of course, last year they learned to adjust without Williams, right? He was in and out of the lineup. He was playing halves of games. He was on minutes restrictions, etc. It's not to say that being without him is a gut punch or a surprise, but that was their situation to start the season. Tonight they were without Al Horford because he had COVID. So they are 21-4 going into this game without Robert Williams. He hasn't played at all. Then they lose their starting center, so they have to start Blake Griffin at center. But the combination of their coaching, their depth, their chemistry, and the top-end star power of their perimeter players, Tatum and Brown, obviously, mostly, but you would also include Smart, Brogdon, and White on that list. It it gives them a cushion in every game. So again, those two guys started pretty weak, but you had Malcolm Brogdon come in to close the first quarter and get some points up. You had Derek White making big defensive plays and moving the ball well all night. And then eventually, you had other guys. I mean, even Griffin and Williams in the first quarter were knocking down threes, and then eventually you get to a point where Tatum and Brown start to knock down shots. It's eventually going to happen. Tatum finishes the game just a tick under 50% from the field, 25 total points, and a win, obviously. And Brown gets to 9 of 24 shooting from the field, not quite as good, but again, 25 points for him as well. You look on the Suns side, and this is something I'll talk more about as time goes on. I don't want to overreact to one game, but it's not really just one game because this is the same thing that happened Monday. The Suns' margin of error is already thinner, in part because of similar circumstances to what I just described with Boston, right? Their version, the Suns' version of being without Robert Williams is being without Jay Crowder. You know, they are without Cam Johnson right now. This was Chris Paul's first game back, which I will give my thoughts on in the next segment. So they already have a little bit of that. But I think if we're being honest with ourselves, the overall sum of the parts is just not as great as Boston's. And in particular, if I'm zooming in, it's totally fine for, and helpful and promising even, to have Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton step up as shot creators against San Antonio, against Detroit, against a not very good Warriors team, struggling Warriors team. But if they're not going to be able to step up, or the Suns aren't able to get them going in big games against Dallas, who we already know is one of the teams that's going to factor into the path through the West, or another finals contender like Boston, then it's insignificant. Then the growth, the development, the fact that we've seen it before, all that is insignificant if they can't get it done against the teams that the Suns really need to beat. The teams that Booker by himself can't take down, right? And that's what I mean about the margin of error. The margin of error right now for this Suns team, frankly, is how good is Devin Booker able to be? Against the best teams, that has been the barometer. Can he beat the defensive scheme that's happening to him, that teams are sending at him? You know, does he have the energy physically? Is he not tired? Does he get into such a great rhythm that it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing, right? And there's some teams where just him and his ability to score and move the ball and create for teammates is going to be enough. But against contending teams, against great teams, it's not enough. And the Suns showed tonight, Mikal Bridges is 2 of 12 from the field. DeAndre Ayton is 4 of 7 from the field. You know, Chris Paul just came back. Cameron Payne was 5 of 13 from the field. The Suns only generated 32 three-point attempts, only had 19 assists as a team, and they only made 8 of those threes. So it's not enough for it just to be him. And if it's not going to be enough for it just to be him, the other guys need to step up. And it can't just be that they step up against Chicago or Golden State or San Antonio. It has to be every night. Otherwise, it might as well not even be happening. And if it's not happening, the margin of error is just going to be too tight. And a well-tuned machine like these Celtics are right now is going to be able to come into your home building and throttle you by 27 points and embarrass you on national TV. And that is what the Suns experienced today. Let's talk about Chris Paul's return. I thought he frankly looked just about the same as he did prior to getting injured. Was that good or bad? I don't necessarily know. We'll get into that in a second. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel incredibly high stakes. You want to power through the rest of this year and start the new year on the right foot, and you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates to help you get there. And that's why you've got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. I'm in the education nonprofit space in my day job, and we're doing a reset. We're going through some changes, and we just hired somebody. A big part of that sell was, here's what we're dealing with, and we need a team member who's going to be flexible and whatever. We were able to put that into a job description. We were able to reach out to that person through LinkedIn, and we were able to make sure through that she was the right candidate. You do that, you add your job to your page, and you put the purple hashtag hiring frame onto your profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Then you use simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Chris Paul returned after missing exactly a month. He was injured November 7th. He came back December 7th. He missed 14 total games, and he played 24 minutes today. I actually think it would have been more had this game been competitive. Monty basically benched the starters around the 4 or 5 minute mark in the third quarter. He mentioned pregame, you want to close games with Chris Paul, and that's part of what's tough about keeping him to a minutes limit is it starts to narrow down how much you really are going to get him in because you want to have him in at the beginning and end of every half. So I think he would have played even more than 24 minutes, but we got to see quite a bit of him. He made one mid-range jumper out of the pick and roll when the game was still competitive. That felt smooth. That looked like normal Chris Paul. He had a few nice drop passes. Like his pick and roll management, his pick and roll mastery, I mean, it was still there. I don't feel like I was watching Chris Paul today feeling like his right heel soreness was some sort of noticeable impediment to him playing at a normally high level, right? Or the level that he had been at. But I think that actually sort of brings us to, I don't want to call it a problem necessarily, but it reminds us of the reality of the Chris Paul experience in 2022 right now and heading into 2023, which is Chris Paul's numbers on the season before that injury: 30 minutes per game, 10 games played. His shooting splits were 37, 27, 88. Okay? He was averaging just 9.4 assists per game, 9.5 points per game. I advocated for Chris Paul to adjust a little bit in terms of his usage, in terms of his overall involvement. He's at a 38.4% assist rate on the season, which would be a significant step back from last season. It would be the lowest number besides the Oklahoma City season, where he was scoring a little bit more and sharing the ball a little bit more, and his rookie season. His usage rate has fallen off a cliff. It is by far the lowest of his career. He is just not shooting, all right, as evidenced by 9.5 points per game. I advocated for a lot of that, and I think I would still stand by that, even despite the rough losses the past two games. What worries me more is the shooting percentages. 37% from the field, that shouldn't happen, even if you're taking a step back. He's taking more of his overall shots from three. He's shooting 44% from 2-point range, which would still be pretty low for his career, but it's not as glaring, So when he's taking more proportion of his shots from deep and he's missing threes, okay, but making threes has to happen for the role that we're envisioning Chris Paul playing, right? So you start to add up all the components of his season, and I think that's more so than anything else where it doesn't feel okay. And so, yes, he looked like he picked up where he left off, but the reality is where he left off wasn't spectacular. And so the reality is right now for this team, and I've said this basically since the dream of getting Kevin Durant died off when he released a graphic with his logo and the team's logos on it and said that they were making up. Since that page got turned past the Kevin Durant saga, the truth about this Suns team has been that they are going to be as good as Mikal Bridges and Deandre Ayton's growth and development over the course of the season allows them to be. Maybe that calculus changes the more times we see those two players not be what they need to be in these big moments. Maybe James Jones changes his mind. We'll talk more about those questions tomorrow. I want to just do a full, is it time to hit the panic button type of episode? But Chris Paul taking a step back, Chris Paul being inconsistent, Chris Paul being cautious with injuries, all these things that I was talking about and pumping up going into the season, they're all based on the belief and the expectation and the hope, if you're the Suns, that those steps back, that relinquishing of control by Chris Paul allows for Bridges and Ayton to step forward and step up. In a lot of moments during Paul's absence, that happened. In a lot of moments, it did not happen. And to win a championship, you have to be at your best. I mean, in theory, every night, but at the very least 4 times out of 7 games against the very, very best teams in the NBA. We just saw 2 of those games back to back. Those guys did not step up. Chris Paul is now back. He doesn't look like he has that switch to flip, at least in the short term. The Suns have games coming up against the Pelicans, 2 of them over the weekend. It's hard to imagine this flipping for those games. Does this start to pile up? Does the reminder of even Chris Paul coming back is not a saving grace? Does this all start to pile up? We'll talk more about that tomorrow, but the bottom line when it comes to Paul is he did come back. He did look mostly like he had looked to start the season, and that's just not going to be good enough unless the rest of these things lock into place. Want to close the show out with some thoughts on the one shining highlight from this matchup, which was Josh Okogie, 28 points in his 23 minutes. Monty said post-game he needs to get him minutes. I'll talk a little bit more about how that could happen. First, today's show, guys, brought to you as well by My Solar Nerd. If you live in a sunny state like Arizona, you've probably had a group or two stop by your house offering you what they claim is free solar. But the truth is that many of those companies aren't even local, and they don't know what they're doing here, and they just want to mislead and overcharge you. That's glaringly obvious. But My Solar Nerd, they're really local, and their mission is simple: help you get the best solar system to fit your needs. The guys at MySolarNerd.com understand the nuances of going solar in Arizona, and they believe that an educated customer is a happy customer. Switching to solar should mean saving you money, and so once you're ready, My Solar Nerd will put their industry knowledge to work for you by choosing the best equipment, warranties, and accredited installers in their network, help you figure out all the credits and incentives that you may qualify for, and manage the entire project for you from start to finish. Our listeners will get a $50 Amazon gift card when you book a no-commitment evaluation at My Solar Nerd. This promotion only for Locked On listeners and only for homeowners. So visit MySolarNerd.com, select Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section, and make the switch to solar on your terms. Start your research process today by visiting MySolarNerd.com and show Locked On some love by letting them know we sent you. Folks, going solar doesn't need to be complicated, and MySolarNerd.com makes it easy. I don't even feel like we have to talk much about the Celtics. I referenced Tatum and Brown's numbers. I referenced some of the aspects of the beginning of the game, but it got out of hand very quickly. And so rather than going in on the negatives again, I'm going to combine the bench mob vibe check and the box score oddity segments that we usually do on these post-game shows and just smash them into one. The box score oddity was Josh Okogie scoring 28 points. The way that relates to the vibe check on the bench is that it feels pretty undeniable at this point that Okogie needs to be playing more. If you listen to my Mavs post-game show from Monday, you will remember that I was the best segment of that game, in my opinion, defensively and just the Suns getting back control of the game from Dallas was when they put Okogie and Bridges on the floor together, and Okogie was able to guard Luka. Tonight, it wasn't so much defense because the game was out of reach and there was nobody to lock down because it was all the benches on the floor. But it was more on the offensive side. 28 points is nothing to sneeze at, even in a blowout, right? He was 8 of 14 from the field, 8 of 10 from the free throw line, which is pretty exciting to see a 10 in the free throw attempt category if you're a Suns fan. For anybody, even including Devin Booker some nights. He only had 4 tonight. He got on the offensive glass. He played with incredible energy. He was at a lot of points in this game the only guy who seemed to give a crap. And maybe most impressively, he was 4 of 6 from deep. And that's kind of where I want to zoom in. If you look at Josh Okogie in the month of December, he has now played, the numbers aren't going to be in here. Going into tonight's game, he was averaging 11, 7, and 5 in 27 minutes per game over the past 2 games that he had played in the month of December. This is his 3rd game, so you add 28 points to the 21 that he had scored previously. So now you're talking 49 points in 3 games, so 16.3 per game. And he had been shooting 22% from deep. He made 4 of 6 tonight, so he's now at 6 of 15 from deep over his last 3 games, over his last almost 100 minutes of playing time. This is not necessarily the point in time where you turn the page and say he's a new man, all right? He's a new player. But I have said from the beginning of this season, before this season started, I was using preseason shows to zoom in on one player, a new addition, and what I thought they might add, how much I thought they might add. And against my better judgment, I fully talked myself into Josh Okogie. And what I said at the time was play him as a forward next to this in lineups featuring a floor spacer or if not a floor spacer like Saric or Landale, at the very least, put him in with the starters. Unleash him defensively. Allow him to be an energy guy, a drive to the basket guy on offense. I even advocated for using him kind of like the Warriors used Gary Payton last year, where he was the Nets have used Bruce Brown in recent years, where he's like a point center or like a wing center, where on offense, he's a roll man, setting screens, rolling to the basket, catching on the short roll, making plays, etc. And then defensively, he's defending wings and guards. They're not fully leaning into that. He hasn't been a screen setter necessarily, but he has been somebody who's been able to get ahead of steam going downhill, whether that's attacking a closeout, whether that's a cut, whether that's a loose ball that he's just grabbing and taking to the rack. So we're starting to get there. The final component of what I said, to bring it back to the shooting, is he just needs to get at or above 30%. That's about the level where defenses at the very least have to give it a at least a ceremonial, symbolic closeout. right now, and maybe in playoff games they leave him wide open anyway. I don't necessarily know, but that's how I have seen it. If he can just get to 30% plus, then he's going to punish teams enough that he can at least stay on the floor. He's not going to start the finals games if the Suns make it to the finals. He's not going to be, a key component of their game plan on a night-to-night basis, but he can at least factor in if the matchup is right, if he needs to be called upon. Gary Payton II is an interesting example because he did not shoot a lot last year, but he made 36% of his threes. He took 120 of them. That was an outlier season. In the playoffs, he made 8 of his 15 threes. It's kind of like that. Right now, Josh Okogie has made 6 of his past 15. It just has to be something the defense has to be aware of. You have to be able to punish them when they leave you super duper wide open because you're going to be able to do enough in these other areas of the game, offensive rebounds, ISO defense, team defense, finishing at the basket, drawing fouls, etc., that you just make enough. It's even Andre Iguodala, right? In his later years, he was not ever much of a shooter, and it felt even less predictable as his career and went toward the end. He's still in the league, obviously, but he just has to make 1 of every 3, 1 of every 4, 2 of every 7, whatever it is. And Okogie just needs to get there, and I do feel optimistic that he's getting there because he feels comfortable. He's not holding back taking these shots. Maybe it's 28%. Maybe it's 30%. But the fact that he checks so many of these other boxes, the fact that Monty is taking notice of him and continuing to feed him minutes and give him time and let him make mistakes and still be on the court, it gives me optimism that we could continue to see development. He's not an old player. This is only his 5th season in the NBA. He's probably in his, physical prime, basically, getting to his mid to late 20s at this point. He's only 24. He just turned 24. So he's not a finished product. And tonight, it was the one beacon of light, so to speak, that I think that the Suns can potentially build upon in an otherwise very ugly game. But that'll wrap us up for the day. Again, not a lot to analyze as far as the X's and O's and the moment-to-moment in this one. 125-98, a loss. I'll close out the week, guys, with a little bit of a bigger picture look after these 2 losses. So hit subscribe, hit follow. I'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for listening to Locked On Suns. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Thursday. Now go make Locked On Sports Today your second listen to catch up on everything around the whole wide world of sports. That show's available wherever you get podcasts as well, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.